It's a great movie from 1984, the master Japanese director Miyazaki, and this is Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind. Here's why I think this movie is great, still watchable, and my analysis of it coming up next. Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, 1984, Miyazaki makes it. Now, this begins to me one of the great stretch runs in movie history, not just animation, but history, because he put out 4 movies in a row within 5 years, or released within 5 years of each other. They're absolutely excellent, but they're wildly different from each other. This one, Castle in the Sky, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service. I can't think of a director who has done that much variety of work, but all of the work is excellent. This stretch of 4 films is amazing. Now, I'm going to analyze this a bit, but first, a warning. I don't know Japanese culture that well or that much, and so there's a lot of lenses you can put up to this movie. Japanese culture, history, environmentalism, maybe Buddhism or different religious aspects of environmentalism or environmental thought. But this movie, to me, reminds me a lot of the science fiction movies around this time period. During this time, 1984 and before it. So I'm going to look at it in terms of what I know. Star Wars, Alien, and Dune, and how those movies are in this one. Now, Nausicaa can be just enjoyed for its artwork, its complexity, its thematic complexity. I think anybody can watch it, and it is still delightful even 40 years later. For that reason, you don't really have to think too much about this movie. You can enjoy it, but I want to think about it. And I think about it in terms of science fiction. It's got a post-apocalyptic scenario. Now, you may say, well, this is just a fantasy movie. Maybe this isn't really real. Nothing's plausible here. But yet, it has some of the trappings of post-apocalyptic fare. And even the beginning of the movie kind of signals its Mad Max world. It has the doomed remnants of a lost civilization trope, where in the deep background, there's 1,000 years ago, an ancient civilization destroyed itself through giant weapons called giant warriors, kind of maybe an analog to nuclear weapons, by the way, or giant weapon systems. And then you have the results of that. So 1,000 years later, you have these people struggling, different kingdoms in the world on Earth, and then this toxic jungle, which is growing and growing and kind of taking over. Humans can't breathe in the toxic jungle, and so you see these masks on these people, which I think, again, gives it the post-apocalyptic flair. Now, the humans and the human characters in this movie are trying to subdue the jungle or trying to control it, and this has one of those themes, you could call it cliched. I actually kind of like it, where the sort of warrior princess, Nausicaa, who's of the valley people, and these people are the smallest or the least powerful people maybe in the movie, and she's able to help these creatures out who other people are scared of. They're the giant insects called ohms in the movie. We learn as the movie goes along that maybe they're part of the ecosystem and that they are benefiting humans more than they are harming them, or maybe humans can learn to live together with them. Nevertheless, it's reasonable on the part of humans, I think, to be a little bit afraid of these things because you can die from them. The toxic jungle is taking over all kinds of areas of the world and killing off various kingdoms, as we're told. Now, the movie is enjoyable to me because it's complex, more so than most animated kids' family fare. I mean, it has 4 different factions in it, 3 human groups and the insect group. You could argue there are other groups, including the ancient revival of the technology of the giant warriors. But it also has this imperial political feel where the Tolmekian people are taking over the valley people, trying to control them, and they're trying to revive the giant warriors to fight back against the toxic jungle. So clearly one of the environmental ideas here is, do you work with the environment, try to seek to understand it in a scientific way, in a holistic way, or do you subdue it, dominate it, and make sure it doesn't take over? Because this is nature after all, and you could die if you aren't careful with these giant ohm insects who are poisonous, and the spores that inhabit their shells and kind of take over kingdoms and destroy human environments. Now, that's not really a whole plot summary. There's a lot more going on even, but that's just the general setting and the setup for this. I personally think of Star Wars when I watch this movie, and how, in fact, Star Wars, and this movie is a response to Star Wars, as pretty much everything is in its wake. I mean, Star Wars Episode 4, also Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi's out by this time too. So the opening trilogy, the first trilogy of Star Wars is out, and I find that the environmental biological themes just aren't there in Star Wars, or they're in the background and they're not brought up much. I mean, does the Empire pollute a lot? Are they harming ecosystems or something like that? We really don't get that feel or idea from Star Wars, at least the first 3 movies, and I feel like Nausicaa comes in and opens up those aspects of science fiction or science fiction fare and this sort of grand hero's quest, hero's journey theme that Nausicaa is kind of on, the Luke Skywalker figure in this movie, in a way, fighting against sort of kind of Imperial forces. And that brings in for me the other movie, Alien, from 1979. The opening of this movie definitely reminds me of that, where she encounters a giant Ohm shell. It's like the astronauts in the movie Alien encountering the lost or doomed alien spacecraft and seeing all that stuff in there. And then later on in the movie, interacting with the Ohm, which is a giant, ugly, alien-like thing. I know it's of the Earth and an insect, but it's alien-like. And so one thing the Alien brings up, for example, in the Aliens movies is nature is harsh, it's cruel, there's stuff out there that can eat you and kill you, you must fight against it. All the parasites and the viruses and the huge creatures, or the little alien creatures that could come kill you. This movie is more about the symbiosis of things, and that humans misunderstand or misinterpret or try to subdue or dominate rather than live with the environment. Classic environmentalist themes that frankly become too cliched most of the time. I find that here they're used very well, and they're opened up here for exploration. I think Miyazaki always asks for exploration, and even stimulates creativity versus more propagandistic, more serious propagandistic stuff. For example, I watched Fern Gully when I was in 8th grade. That movie is total propaganda to me. It's very clear there's a stern moral message in it, whereas this one is more gentle about the morality of the scenario and the environmentalism in the movie. And I also think it's remarkable that Dune by David Lynch was made in this time period. 1984, Dune is released. 1984, Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, the great hero who's going to ride the beast and save the planet or save the world against political forces. I mean, there are general ideas and general themes that are somewhat similar between these two things. I always think there's something in the air. It's like a zeitgeist thing, where Dune is a response to Star Wars as a movie, and this movie is a response to Star Wars in many different ways. And I think Miyazaki's style here kind of opens up. He lingers a lot on long takes. He lets the airships go all the way across the frame. He lets things go while other people would cut. And that may make things slower. To me, it makes things much more hypnotic. And he finds a hypnotic style and a pacing that is really unmatched to me. I think I can feel like I can zone out during these movies and enjoy them in sort of a weird, zoned out, hypnotic state, if you can understand that. But the willingness on his part to let the viewer linger on an image and let the image go across, or the thing in the frame go across or go down, and just wait on that thing to go, showing the thing in its whole, which I think is the key here. It's a holistic movie about all the different aspects of reality, including the biological, environmental, and he wants you to see the whole. This is not about being fast-paced and being entertaining as much as it's being thoughtful and provocative and stimulating. And I also think the movie is dealing with, as I said, imperialist politics, questions of using nuclear weapons. It's very, very tangential to the Cold War and nuclear weapons questions. Should we use giant weapons? What would they do to the environment? The question of nuclear weapons and radioactivity and how they stimulate or destroy environments has been around in Japanese culture for a while. Godzilla movies, for example. I think it's coming up here, but in an oblique way. And so those questions to me are pretty interesting and fascinating. And since this movie's for kids, opens those questions up to them, but being very gentle. And I think that's one of Miyazaki's great traits, is that even though this is kind of a pretty violent movie, he's gentle in leading people into certain ideas, rather than hitting them over the head with them, or making, serious, obvious propaganda. Now, those are some scattered thoughts about this movie. I wonder what you think about it, putting it in the frame of Star Wars, Alien, Mad Max, and Dune, but there's other ways to think about this. So let us know in the comments what you think and how you watch this movie. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thanks, and have a great day. This video is dedicated to Otaku Theory, great user on Discord. Thank you very much for the suggestion, a lover of anime. I hope you enjoyed this one.